I was 27 and my girlfriend of over 5 years had just broken up with me. Not to go too much into personal details, but I felt she had been really dishonest near the end, and that hit me pretty hard. To clear my head, I picked a random location I'd never been to and just booked a flight. That place happened to be Australia. Upon arriving, the vast rugged beauty of the outback seemed like the perfect escape. I decided to venture into the less traveled parts, hoping the solitude would mend my spirits. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange, I set up camp near an old gnarled eucalyptus tree by a billabong, a place locals had mentioned with a mix of reverence and fear. That night, the air was unusually still, the usual chorus of nocturnal creatures eerily silent. I was drifting into sleep when a strange, gurgling sound jolted me awake. Peering out from my tent, the moonlit water of the billabong rippled as if something large had just submerged. Curiosity mixed with a tinge of fear, I stepped out, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Then I heard it, a low, mournful wail, not quite animal and not quite human. The locals had whispered about the bunyip, a creature from Aboriginal lore said to dwell in such waters, preying on the unwary. I chuckled at my own nervousness, attributing the sound to the wind or perhaps my imagination fueled by local legends. But as I turned back, a shadow loomed over me. What stood before me was no trick of the light. It had a grotesque form, part seal, part something indescribably ancient, with eyes that glowed a dull red in the flashlight's beam. The bunyip, if that's what it was, emitted a stench of decay, its presence chilling me more than the cool night air. I froze, my mind racing for any lore I'd skimmed over in my pre-trip research. Run? Play dead? Before I could decide, another sound broke the tension, a series of thuds, like something heavy moving through the bush. From the opposite direction, a figure emerged, but this one was bipedal, covered in hair, towering and broad. It had to be the Yowie, another creature of Australian myth, known as Australia's Bigfoot. Caught between what seemed like two legends come to life, my heart pounded a frantic rhythm. The Yowie, however, didn't advance towards me. Instead, it seemed fixated on the bunyip. With a roar that echoed through the night, the Yowie charged, not at me, but past me, towards the water creature. The ensuing clash was otherworldly, the bunyip's wails mixed with the Yowie's grunts. Seizing my chance, I ran, not daring to look back until my camp was far behind, and the sounds of their battle faded into the whispering winds of the outback. Back in civilization, nobody believed my tale. They laughed it off as the wild imaginings of a heartbroken tourist, or perhaps a prank influenced by too much local folklore. But I knew what I saw, and felt, and the fact that I barely escaped. That night, under the vast Australian sky, the myths of old weren't just stories. They were as real and as terrifying as the heartbreak I had tried to escape. I grew up near Sydney, and my childhood was uneventful for the most part. I'd hang out with my mates, and do other little kid stuff. One time, I had to do this report for class on Australian folklore. That's when things started to get weird. For my report, I decided to dive deep into the legends of the bunyip and the Yowie, thinking they'd make a thrilling presentation. The bunyip, said to lurk in swamps, billabongs, and creeks, was described with various terrifying features. A dog-like face, dark fur, flippers, and a horse's tail. The Yowie, on the other hand, was like Australia's version of the Bigfoot, a giant ape-like creature roaming the outback. I interviewed old Mr. Thompson, who lived on the edge of the bushland. He was known for his tales, though most dismissed them as the ramblings of an old man. But that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, he told me something that sent chills down my spine. "Be careful when you speak of them," he whispered, his eyes scanning the encroaching darkness outside his window. "They listen, you know, especially the Yowie. It doesn't like being talked about by those who don't respect the land." I laughed it off back then, thinking it was just his way to spook a curious kid, but that night, things changed. I was in my room, surrounded by books and printouts about these creatures, when I heard a peculiar sound outside. It was like a low growl mixed with the rustle of leaves, but there was no wind that night. Curiosity got the better of me, and I peered out my window into the backyard, which bordered the dense bush. There, under the pale moonlight, I saw something move. It was large, too large to be any local wildlife I knew of. Its silhouette was hulking, with eyes that caught the moonlight, glowing an eerie green. In that moment, I remembered the descriptions of the yowie, and my heart raced. The next few nights, the sounds grew closer, and I started seeing signs, large footprints in the garden, claw marks on trees, and once, a tuft of coarse hair caught on our fence. My parents didn't believe me, attributing it to local wildlife or my overactive imagination fueled by my project. The climax came one stormy night. The power went out, and in the flash of lightning, I saw it clearly for the first time. The creature was at my window, its face pressed against the glass, eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and something darker. It was then I realized Mr. Thompson's warning wasn't just a tale. The yowie, or whatever this was, seemed angered or perhaps intrigued by my interest. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I decided to end my research, hoping to appease whatever I had unwittingly summoned or offended. I even went back to Mr. Thompson, who advised me to leave an offering of food in the bush as a sign of respect and apology. I did as instructed, leaving fruits and meat at the edge of our property. The disturbances stopped after that. No more sounds, no more sightings. But the experience left me with a profound respect and a lingering fear of the unknown creatures of my homeland. Years later, I still wonder if what I experienced was real, or just a child's vivid nightmare fueled by folklore. But on quiet nights, when I hear the distant howl of the wind or something unknown, I'm reminded that there are things in this world, especially in the ancient land of Australia, that we do not fully understand. And perhaps it's better that way. After graduating from high school, me and a few of my buddies decided to celebrate by taking a trip to Australia. For context, we were from Florida and had heard this running joke that Australia is a bit like our home state and how bizarre and extreme things were. Little did we know, our adventure would plunge us into the heart of Australian folklore, where the line between myth and reality blurs. Our journey began in Sydney, but the real thrill started when we ventured into the outback, seeking the raw beauty of the wilderness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange, we set up camp near an old billabong, a place locals mysteriously smiled about when we mentioned our plans. As night fell, the sounds of the bush were both enchanting and eerie. We sat around our campfire, sharing stories, when Jake, always the skeptic, laughed off the tales of the bunyip. For backstory, a bunyip is a creature said to lurk in such waters. Just a story to scare kids, Jake declared, tossing another log onto the fire. That's when the air grew thick, and an unsettling silence fell, broken only by a distant, mournful cry that chilled our bones. Suddenly, the water of the billabong rippled, and a shape emerged, its features obscured by the night, but unmistakably not of this world. It was massive, with eyes that glowed dimly in the moonlight, and it moved towards us with a purpose. Panicked, we scattered, but in the chaos I tripped over a root, my ankle twisting painfully. As the creature neared, I could smell the rank, muddy scent of the billabong on it. Just when I thought my end was near, a sharp whistle cut through the night. There she was, a figure silhouetted against the moonlit sky, standing firm with what looked like a traditional Aboriginal spear in hand. She whistled again, a sound so piercing it seemed to pain the creature. "Get behind me," she commanded, with an authority that left no room for hesitation. I limped towards her, my heart pounding. She introduced herself only as Ponch Monster, a name that seemed oddly fitting given the circumstances. With a mix of modern knowledge and ancient lore, she explained she was a guardian of sorts, protecting both the land and the foolish tourists like us from its more malevolent inhabitants. Ponch Monster began chanting in a language I didn't recognize, her voice weaving through the night, and the bunyip, whatever it was, hesitated, then retreated back into the water with a resentful splash. She turned to me, her eyes reflecting an old soul. "You're in Yarama Yahoo territory now. They don't like outsiders much, especially not those who mock their existence." Throughout the night, she shared stories of other creatures, the yowie, the Hawkesbury River monster, and even tales of the drop bear, which she chuckled about, calling it a tale for tourists, but with a hint of truth in the vast wild outback. Ponch Monster wasn't just a protector, she was a bridge between the ancient world and ours, using both fear and respect to keep the balance. She taught us a few chants, not for protection, she said, but to show respect to the land and its hidden guardians. By morning, my friends had regrouped, all with their own tales of narrow escapes, thanks to signs or sounds they now attributed to Ponch Monster's guidance. We left the outback with more than just a graduation trip tale. we carried with us a profound respect for the land, its stories, and its protectors. As for Ponch Monster, she vanished as mysteriously as she appeared, leaving us wondering if she was just another legend of this land, or perhaps something more. But one thing was certain, Australia was indeed like Florida in its capacity for the bizarre, but here, the bizarre could very well be lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting graduates. My wife and I decided to honeymoon in Australia, not because either of us or our families were from there, but because we both thought it would be an interesting destination. We were eager to explore the outback, dive in the Great Barrier Reef, and perhaps encounter some of Australia's unique wildlife. Little did we know, our adventure would take us far beyond the usual tourist trails into the heart of its darkest folklore. Our journey took a sinister turn on our third night, camped out under the vast, starlit sky near Uluru. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, almost expectant. That's when we first heard it, a low, mournful wail that seemed to come from the earth itself. Ignoring it as the wind or some nocturnal animal, we tried to sleep. The next day, while exploring a lesser-known trail, we stumbled upon ancient rock paintings, not listed in any guidebook. Among depictions of hunters and kangaroos, there were figures that chilled our blood, elongated, shadow-like creatures with eyes that seemed to follow us. My wife, always the more adventurous, laughed it off as ancient ghost stories, but that night, the wail returned, closer and more desperate. It was our fifth night when the true terror began. We were awakened by the feeling of being watched. Opening our tent, we saw them. Figures from the paintings, the bunyip with its fearsome growl, and something that looked like a twisted version of the Yaramayahu, its skin red and glistening, waiting to pounce. They circled our camp, their forms barely discernible in the moonlight, yet unmistakably real. Panic set in as we realized our phones had no signal, and our vehicle was too far. Just as the creature seemed ready to close in, a light pierced the darkness. A man approached, his silhouette tall against the beam of his flashlight. "Stay behind me, lady and man," he commanded with an accent thick with the bush. He introduced himself as Mariner Jaros, a local who knew these lands and its legends. With a didgeridoo in hand, he began to play a haunting tune. The creatures hesitated, their forms wavering like shadows in a flickering light. Mariner explained in hushed tones that these beings were stirred by those who tread too carelessly on sacred ground, angered by the desecration of their stories. Mariner's music wasn't just sound, it was a barrier, a negotiation with the spirits. He spoke to them in a language that felt as old as the earth, sometimes stern, sometimes pleading. Slowly the creatures began to retreat, their forms dissolving into the night, their wails now sounding more like laments than threats. As dawn broke, Mariner led us back to safety. Before parting, he gave us a small carved stone. "For protection," he said. "Remember, lady and man, respect the land and it'll respect you. These old ones, they're not evil, just guardians of their tales." We left Australia with more than just photographs and souvenirs. We carried with us a newfound respect for the unseen, for the stories that shape the very land. And though we never saw Mariner Jaros again, his name, like the creatures of that night, became a legend in our own personal folklore. To this day, he serves as a reminder of the thin veil between the world we know and the mysteries that lie just beyond.